Everything started when I was 14 and my little brother, Caleb, was 9. Mom had remarried about 3 years earlier to a guy named Martin. He came with 3 kids of his own from his first marriage, 2 girls and a boy, all younger than us. From the very beginning, Martin didn't bother to hide the fact that we weren't his concern. Fine. We didn't need another dad anyway. Our real dad had passed away when I was 6, and Caleb barely had any memory of him at all. Looking back now, maybe I should have noticed the warning signs sooner. Martin had this obsession with food, like, not just what we ate, but how much. He'd actually count the chicken pieces on our plates or measure out cereal into the bowls. And Mom? She never stepped in. She'd just sit there with this forced little smile she'd worn ever since marrying him. The day everything blew up started off like any other. Caleb and I walked home from school together like we always did. I picked him up at the elementary school before heading back. It was a Friday in May, I remember, because I had a math test the next day that I never got to take. As we got closer to the house, I noticed a cloud of black smoke coming from the backyard. At first I thought Martin might be grilling, but there was way too much smoke for that. We sprinted the last block, and as soon as we turned into the driveway, I heard shouting coming from the back. We dropped our backpacks and ran around the side of the house. And that's when I saw it. There was a giant bond blaze in the middle of the yard. But it wasn't wood set alight, it was our stuff. Our clothes, our books, Caleb's stuffed animals, my sports equipment, everything. Martin stood there with a gas can, splashing more fuel onto the blaze. Mom was standing nearby, holding her phone up, recording the whole thing like it was a comedy skit. She was actually laughing. Martin's kids were crowded by the sliding glass door, pointing and laughing along with her. I just froze, trying to wrap my head around what I was seeing. Caleb started crying instantly. I just stood there, numb. Martin was the first to notice us. He smiled, not a normal smile, but this sick grin, like he was proud of what he'd done. He said something about how we ate like grown men but gave nothing back, called us leeches, and told us they couldn't afford to feed us anymore. Then Mom, my own mother, turned the camera on us. In this fake cheerful voice, like she was announcing a game show prize, she said they were moving to France the next day. Without us. Caleb was bawling, begging her to tell us where we were supposed to sleep. She just shrugged and said after today, it wasn't her problem anymore. Martin pointed down the street and told us foster care was only 3 blocks away, so we should get moving. The neighbors' kids were out in their yard filming everything on their phones. I felt this crushing humiliation on top of everything else. I watched Caleb's bike melt into the blaze after Martin doused it with more fuel. He said his real kids needed the garage space. That's when something inside me shifted. Not in an angry, screaming kind of way. More like an icy clarity. I grabbed Caleb's hand and told him to remember everything, every single word, every detail. Then we walked away. I had no plan, no idea where to go, but I knew we couldn't stay there. First, we went to the park. Caleb cried nonstop, and I just let him, trying to figure out our next move. We had nothing, no money, no phone, not even a change of clothes. After about an hour, I decided to try Uncle Victor. He was Dad's brother, lived about 40 minutes away by bus. We hadn't seen him much since Dad died. Mom always said Victor was bad news, that he drank too much, couldn't keep a steady job. But he was the only person I could think of. We snuck onto a bus since we had no money for fare. Caleb sat next to me in silence, his face pale and empty. By the time we reached Victor's apartment complex, it was around 8 in the evening. I didn't even know which unit was his, so we went through all the buzzers until we found his name. He didn't answer at first. We kept buzzing until finally his girlfriend, Denise, came down. At first, she didn't even recognize us, it had been that long. Once I explained who we were, she looked uneasy but led us upstairs. Victor was already half drunk when we walked in. He was surprised to see us, but not exactly thrilled. I had to explain what happened 4 different times before he started to believe me. At first, he thought we were lying or exaggerating. He tried calling Mom, but she didn't answer. Then he called Martin, who actually picked up. I could hear Martin's voice through the phone, saying we'd run away because we didn't want to do chores, and that they were done with us. Then he hung up. Victor looked at us like we were some problem he hadn't signed up for. He and Denise argued quietly in the kitchen while we sat on their couch. I could tell they didn't want us there, but they also couldn't just throw us out. Finally, Victor came back and said we could stay a few days until he figured something else out. There was no guest room, so we slept on the floor in the living room. That night, Caleb kept waking up crying. I'd never felt so useless in my life. I promised him I'd take care of him, but the truth was, I had no idea how. We were just kids. The next morning, Victor drove us back to the house to see if they'd really left. The place was deserted. They were gone. Cars, belongings, everything. They'd even changed the locks. Through the windows we could see half-empty rooms. They'd taken what they wanted and walked away from the rest. We went to talk to the neighbors, the ones whose kids had filmed everything. Their mom, Marcia, looked horrified when we told her what happened. She said she'd seen them leave early that morning, piling into a taxi with a bunch of suitcases. She even showed us the video her kids recorded of the Bon Blaze. It was all real. They had left behind us. Marcia gave us some old clothes and made breakfast while Victor talked to her husband. I overheard them debating whether to call social services. I begged them not to. I couldn't risk being separated from Caleb. After some heated discussion, Victor finally agreed to let us stay with him, at least for the time being. He made it clear he wasn't trying to be our dad, but he also couldn't dump his brother's kids into the system. That night, back in Victor's place, I found Caleb curled up with his old iPad, the one he'd left at a friend's house the day before. Thank God for that. He was scrolling through the handful of family photos still saved on it. One of them was all of us together, before Dad died. Back then, Mom didn't even look like the same person. In those old photos she seemed happy, soft, almost kind. I asked Caleb if he could make sense of why she'd done this to us. He was only 9, but sometimes kids see more clearly than adults. He told me Martin had made her choose us or them, and she chose them. Later, Marcia filled in the rest. Martin had been planning everything for months. He'd landed a job in France and decided it was the perfect chance to wipe the slate clean. He'd always resented spending his money on someone else's kids. All those food rules, the cutting remarks, the way he nitpicked us, it was all building up to this moment. He managed to convince Mom they'd have a better life without us dragging them down. That second week at Victor's place was brutal. He had no clue how to take care of kids, and Denise only helped because she felt like she had to. You could tell she wasn't thrilled to have us around. They argued constantly, usually about money or about us. I missed a full week of school before Victor finally enrolled us in new schools near his apartment. I had to pretend everything was fine, but nothing about life was normal anymore. At night, after Caleb fell asleep, I'd replay the whole thing in my head. The blaze. Their laughter. The way they tossed us aside like garbage. I swore that one day, when they least expected it, they'd be forced to remember what they did. I didn't know how yet, but I promised myself I'd find a way. 10 years later, that chance finally came. Out of nowhere, Caleb's phone lit up with more than 50 messages from Mom, long walls of text, voicemails, missed calls. After a 13 years of silence, suddenly she needed something. That was the spark that set our payback plan in motion. I'll share more tomorrow about the years between and how we started laying the groundwork. This is already too long, and writing it out drags me back into memories I thought I'd buried. But believe me, what we eventually did was worth every second of waiting. Update 1. I didn't expect so many people to care about what happened to me and Caleb. Some of you asked for more details about the years in between, so here's what went down. Living with Victor turned from a short-term fix into a permanent situation. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months, and before we knew it, that tiny 2-bedroom apartment became our new reality. But Victor never let us forget we were an inconvenience. He and Denise had the bedroom while Caleb and I slept on the living room floor. No privacy, no space, and definitely no sense of home. 2 months in, Victor lost his job again. He blamed us, said the stress of suddenly feeding 3 extra mouths was why he messed up. That night, I heard him and Denise fighting. She said she hadn't signed up to raise someone else's kids and maybe it was time to call social services. I stayed awake the whole night, terrified they'd hand us over and split us up. The next morning, I skipped school and went door to door at every business with a help wanted sign. Most people laughed in my face at a 14-year-old asking for work. Finally, a small convenience store owner agreed to pay me cash under the table to stock shelves after school. It wasn't much, but it was something. When I got home that night, Victor was drunk on the couch. He looked at me and said something I'll never forget: "We were just like our dad, a burden on everyone." Turns out Dad had borrowed money from Victor years ago and never paid it back before he died. That bitterness had carried over to us. From then on, I worked every day after school and on weekends. Most of what I earned went to Victor for rent. I saved scraps when I could. Caleb would do his homework at the store while I stocked shelves. The owner felt bad for us and sometimes slipped Caleb free snacks. School slipped further and further down my list of priorities. My grades nosedived. I went from honor roll to barely scraping by. Teachers called, but Victor never picked up. I forged his signature on report cards. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared that we were basically raising ourselves. Meanwhile, Denise grew more bitter. She and Victor fought almost nonstop, about money, about us, about everything. 6 months after we moved in, she gave him an ultimatum: either we left or she did. Victor chose her. I came home from work one night to find our few belongings stacked by the door. Victor sat at the table with a bottle, eyes fixed on nothing. He told us Denise was moving out unless we left, and he couldn't afford the place without her. We had 4 days to figure it out. By then I was 16. Caleb was 13. I seriously considered buying a 9-it and just living in the park. But then something unexpected happened. The next day, Denise came home early while Victor was out. She sat us down and actually apologized. She admitted the ultimatum had been desperate, that Victor had been drinking more, working less, and their relationship was falling apart. She said she didn't really want to be the reason 2 kids ended up homeless. Instead, she offered us another option. Her sister Claire had a finished basement she wasn't using. It wasn't much, but it had its own entrance and a small bathroom. Denise had already talked to her, and Claire agreed to let us stay if I helped with yard work and maintenance. So we moved again. Claire was decent, though distant. She made it clear she wasn't adopting us, she was just giving us a place to land. The basement was cold and damp, but it beat Victor's living room floor or foster care. We stayed there through the rest of high school. I kept working at the store and picked up extra jobs mowing lawns in the summer and shoveling snow in the winter. Between school and work, I was always exhausted. But I didn't have a choice. Caleb had his own battles. Word got out at school that we were living in someone's basement, and kids started picking on him. He got into fights standing up for himself. After the 4th time he came home with a bloody nose, I taught him how to throw a real punch. The next kid who tried him ended up with a broken nose. Caleb got suspended, but I wasn't mad. I was proud. He finally stood his ground. Through it all, Mom never reached out. Not a call. Not a text. Not an email. It was like we didn't even exist. We had one thin thread still connecting us to that side of the family: Mom's cousin Naomi. She wasn't particularly close with Mom, but she felt guilty about what happened, so every once in a while she'd check in on us. Maybe twice a year she'd stop by, catch up, and give us scraps of news. That's how we found out their dream life in France had crashed and burned. Martin's fancy job didn't even last 6 months. Money got tight, and within 3 years they were back in the States. Not in our old town, though. They moved 2 hours away to start over again. Naomi also told us Mom had another baby with Martin. A boy. The fact that she could throw away her first 2 sons and then go have another one really messed Caleb up. By the time I limped across the finish line of high school, barely passing, no shot at college, no money anyway, Caleb was 14 and working part-time too. I lucked into a warehouse job that actually paid decent. Between the two of us, we scraped together enough to rent a crappy apartment. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and that mattered. I pushed Caleb harder than I'd ever pushed myself. Told him he had to be better than me. He listened. Kid was sharper than I ever was. He studied like his life depended on it and landed a partial scholarship to state college. I picked up every overtime shift I could to cover the rest. He wanted to become a doctor, big dreams for a kid who'd been left with nothing. Life slowly started to move forward. I got promoted to supervisor at the warehouse. Caleb thrived at college, grinding through biology classes on the pre-med track. We didn't talk about Mom or Martin anymore. It was like they lived in some alternate universe that brushed against ours only through Naomi's updates. And then, out of nowhere, last month everything flipped. It was just a normal Tuesday. I was at work when Caleb called me. He never calls while I'm on the clock, so I knew something was off. When I picked up, he was out of breath, like he'd been running. He told me to check my email immediately. I opened it and saw a screenshot of a text conversation. Took me a second before it clicked, it was Mom. After 13 years of silence, she'd finally reached out. Not to apologize. Not to reconnect. She wanted something. Her message started with, "I know it's been a long time," like she'd just been busy the last 13 years. Then she explained that her son, the real son, in Martin's words, was sick. Kidney disease. Needed a operation. Neither she nor Martin were matches, and neither were the girls. So she reached out to Caleb, asking if he'd get tested for a half-brother he'd never even met. The gall of this woman. She tosses us aside like garbage, and now she comes crawling back when she needs spare parts for her golden child. Caleb was stunned. I was furious. But underneath the anger, I felt something else, clarity. This was it. The moment we'd been waiting for. They needed something from us. They were exposed. It was time to make them remember. I told Caleb not to respond yet. We needed to think. Use this. He agreed. That night we sat in my apartment until 4 a.m, mapping it out. First came research. Martin had some business he was trying to grow. Online, it looked like he was seeking commercial property. Mom, meanwhile, didn't work. She was busy being a full-time mom to her real family. Their social media made them look picture perfect, like we'd never existed. At first, we were just going to tell her no. But the more we talked, the bigger the plan grew. We wanted them to pay. To remember the day they burned our belongings and told us to walk ourselves to foster care. To feel just a slice of the fear and humiliation they'd cast aside on us. Caleb, usually the calm one, was all in. He said, "They left us with nothing. Let's see how they handle losing everything." Step 1 was gathering intel. Caleb suggested we reach out to Marcia, our old neighbor, who might still have the video of the bond blaze. That kind of proof could be powerful. The next day I drove back to our old neighborhood. Marcia was still there, though her kids were grown. She remembered us right away and welcomed me in. When I explained about the kidney request, she looked horrified. She rummaged through old files and found the video, 13 years old, but crystal clear. Hearing Mom's laugh while our things burned made my stomach turn. Meanwhile, I dug into Martin's business expansion plans. Thanks to my warehouse work, I had connections in commercial real estate. I could use that to get close. Caleb's job was to string Mom along, reply just enough to keep her hopeful, gather more details, and squeeze every bit of information out of her. She admitted something huge: Martin had no idea she'd contacted us. He still called us leeches, and she was sneaking behind his back, desperate to save her precious boy. Through Naomi, we also learned our step-siblings were teenagers now, the oldest about to head to college. Perfect. A financial weak spot. Piece by piece, the plan came together. Nothing illegal, nothing violent, we wouldn't stoop to their level. But we would force them to face consequences. To know what it feels like when the ground disappears beneath your feet. Last week, the first move went live. Caleb finally replied to Mom, asking for more information. She called him right away, sobbing with gratitude that he might even consider it. Not once did she ask how we'd survived. Not one question about our lives. Now the stage is set. Tomorrow, I'm meeting Martin in person about a commercial property he thinks will help his business grow. He won't recognize me. I'm using my middle name. It's been 13 years since we last saw each other. And he has no idea who he's really dealing with. Caleb was set to meet Mom at a cafe to talk about the kidney. After 13 years of clawing our way back from nothing, we were finally in a position to take everything they valued, money, reputation, family loyalty, and turn it against them. No violence, nothing illegal, just using their own weaknesses. Tomorrow's meetings would be the start. This was just the beginning. Update 2. A lot has gone down since the last time I wrote. The plan is officially moving, and it's moving fast. It's 3 in the morning as I type this because my blood's still buzzing from everything that happened. First, my meeting with Martin. I dressed the part, slacks, button-up shirt, the whole thing. Not how I normally look, but I needed to seem professional. Part of me worried he might recognize me, but 13 years is a long time, and I've changed. Broader shoulders, new haircut, some stubble. Plus, back then he barely even looked at me. He picked some overpriced cafe for the meeting. Same old Martin, a smug grin, flashy watch he kept glancing at, fake charm oozing off him. Funny thing, though, he seemed taller in my memories. Childhood monsters always do. I introduced myself using my middle name, Daniel. Told him I worked with commercial properties and heard he was looking to expand. The whole time I couldn't stop thinking, this is the same man who poured fuel on my little brother's bike and told us to go find foster care. And he had no clue who was sitting across from him. I showed him photos of a property I'd found through a contact at the warehouse. On paper, it looked like a dream, perfect size, prime location, decent price. What he didn't know was that the building was a money pit, loaded with structural problems that would drain him dry. The current owner was desperate to unload it before the truth came out. Martin practically drooled over the pictures. He went on about how it was exactly what his business needed. I dropped hints that he should act fast before someone else snatched it up. Typical sales pressure nonsense. He swallowed it whole. To sweeten the bait, I casually mentioned the seller was going through a divorce and might cave for a quick sale. His eyes lit up at the thought of profiting off someone else's misery. Same selfish bastard as always. Meanwhile, across town, Caleb was at the cafe with Mom. We'd timed it so our meetings overlapped, making sure she couldn't bother Martin while I was with him. After my part wrapped up, I parked near Caleb's cafe and waited. When he came out, he looked rattled. We drove back to my apartment in silence until he finally spilled what happened. Mom had shown up armed with photos of her precious youngest son, shoving them in Caleb's face, pleading with him to be the one to save his life. Caleb told me she didn't even ask about him, about his life, his past 13 years, until he brought it up himself. And then all she gave was a half-hearted, "I'm sorry it had to be that way." Not even close to an apology. And the kicker? She admitted Martin still had no clue she'd reached out. She said he'd explode if he knew she was talking to the leeches. That word again. Parasites. After all these years, he still called us that. She even made Caleb promise not to tell him about their meeting. Which was perfect for us. Caleb told her he'd think about getting tested but needed details first. She was so desperate she immediately handed over full medical records. 10 years without so much as a birthday text, and suddenly she's flooding his phone with calls, updates, emotional manipulation every few hours. 2 days later, Martin talking to Daniel, called me. He was ready to move forward on the property. I passed him off to the seller, another warehouse buddy who owed me a favor, and stepped back to watch it play out. Martin signed a lease without a proper inspection, locking himself into a deal that would bleed him dry. Just the deposit was in the 6-figure range. At the same time, Caleb kept stringing Mom along. He told her he'd need to meet the boy in person before making any decision. She hesitated but agreed, inviting him over for dinner the following weekend, still begging him to keep it from Martin. The pieces of our plan were clicking together faster than we'd imagined. But then something unexpected happened. One night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but instinct made me pick up. It was Martin's daughter, Claire. She'd tracked Caleb down on Instagram after noticing her mom acting secretive. She overheard enough to figure out the youngest brother was sick and mom was contacting us behind Martin's back. She wanted to warn us. Said Martin was on the edge of a breakdown from his failing business and that her brother's condition was worse than mom had admitted. Claire remembered us. She'd only been 6 when we were thrown out, but she said she had nightmares for years about that day. Their parents had told them we were dangerous, that's why we had to leave so suddenly. The whole story had been twisted until we were the villains. At first, I wanted to hang up. She'd been laughing with the others while our lives burned in that blaze. But then I thought she was just a kid, brainwashed by her dad. I wasn't about to forgive her, but I wasn't dismissing her either. I asked why she was reaching out now. She said guilt had been eating her alive, and when she realized her mom was begging the brothers she'd left behind for a kidney, something in her broke. She wanted nothing to do with it. She also told us Martin's business was already on shaky ground before the expansion, which explained his desperation. Our trap was working better than we thought. That night, Caleb and I sat down and had a long, serious talk about what this new twist meant. We decided we were going to roll with the plan. Caleb would still head to the dinner like we'd talked about, but now we had extra insight into the family's messed up dynamics that we could use to our advantage. The dinner went down yesterday, and let me tell you, it was a complete circus. Caleb showed up with a tiny audio recorder tucked under his shirt, totally legal where we live since only one person needs to consent to being recorded. Mom introduced him around as if he were the son of an old family friend, supposedly in pre-med and interested in donating a kidney. Martin looked suspicious, but he was too wrapped up in his business troubles to pay close attention. Their boy, the one who actually needed the kidney, looked awful. 16 years old, but so frail and pale he could have passed for 13. Caleb told me it was tough not to feel sympathy for him, especially since the kid had no clue who Caleb really was. The other kids, now in their teenage years, kept sneaking strange glances at Caleb through the meal. Halfway in, Martin's phone rang. On the recording, you can actually hear Caleb stifling laughter as Martin stepped outside to answer it. It turned out to be the property seller, dropping a bomb. The inspection had revealed black mold spreading all over the building, and thanks to the contract, Martin was still on the hook for the cleanup. That meant $9s of thousands of dollars piled on top of what he'd already sunk into it. When he came back, his face was twisted with rage, and he started lashing out at everyone at the table. Caleb said he went off about how nothing ever worked out, how nobody respected the effort he put in. And then, mid-rant, Martin's eyes locked on Caleb. He froze, staring like he'd just seen a ghost. He narrowed his eyes and asked Caleb if they'd met before, said he looked familiar. That part wasn't supposed to happen. Caleb had to improvise on the spot. He told Martin maybe he was confusing him with his older brother, said they looked a lot alike. Martin asked the brother's name, and Caleb, cool as hell, answered Ethan. Right then, Martin's whole face drained of color. The gears started turning. He pressed Caleb for his actual name. When Caleb gave it, Martin completely lost control. He flipped the dining table, sending food and dishes flying everywhere. He shouted that Mom had invited one of the leeches into their house. The sick kid sat frozen, scared and confused. The other kids rushed to calm their dad down while Mom broke into tears, insisting she didn't have a choice, that their son's only chance was if Caleb turned out to be a match. That's when the realization smacked Martin in the face. His wife had secretly reached out to the very children they left behind, hoping to get a kidney for their boy. Martin went berserk, accusing Mom of betrayal and of endangering the family by letting Caleb inside. Caleb said the sick kid just stared at him with these big, lost eyes, like he couldn't figure out why his father was calling this stranger a parasite. Then Martin grabbed Caleb by the shirt, trying to toss him out himself. But Caleb, who stays in shape at the campus gym, shook him off easily and shoved him back. He warned Martin never to lay hands on him again, adding that unlike him, he didn't make a habit of mistreating children. Mom begged both of them to stop. The other teenagers had their phones out, recording everything, ironically just like the day our stuff got burned. Caleb told Martin in his steady voice that he only showed up because their mother had begged him to think about helping his half-brother, and that Martin ought to be grateful he'd even considered it after everything they did to us. Martin demanded to know what he meant. Caleb reminded him of the day they torched our belongings and told us to walk ourselves into foster care. Martin denied it, swearing it never happened, claiming we'd been dangerous and they had to leave for safety's sake. That's when Mom broke down even harder. Caleb pulled out his phone and played Marcia's video. The one where they laughed while set alight our things, calling us leeches, and Mom clearly saying they were off to France without us. The one where Martin told us to walk to foster care. The room went dead silent as the clip played. The sick kid burst into tears. The older kids looked horrified. Martin lunged to grab Caleb's phone, but Caleb held it back, saying he had copies. Martin then tried to threaten him with a legal case over recording without consent. Caleb didn't even flinch. He told him about the single-party consent law in our state and pointed out that the real legal issue here was leaving children behind, something with no statute of limitations here. Martin barked at him to get out. On his way to the door, Mom chased after him, still pleading about the kidney. Caleb said he'd think about it, but if he did agree, there would be strings attached. And that's where things stand. Martin now knows exactly who Caleb is, but he doesn't know about me. Meanwhile, he's drowning in financial problems from that property deal. The perfect family mask is slipping as the kids realize the truth of what their parents did to us. Mom's clinging to Caleb because her son's life depends on it. Tomorrow we push forward with phase 2. I'm going to accidentally bump into Martin at his business and reveal who I am, along with my part in that doomed property deal. Caleb plans to reach out directly to the older kids and show them even more of what really went down 13 years ago. The best part? We haven't broken a single law. We're just letting the truth and their own decisions come back around. Martin's financial mess is the result of nothing but his own greed. Mom is dealing with the fallout of abandoning her children, then expecting them to come running when she needed something. Some might argue the sick kid doesn't deserve this, and they're right, he is innocent. But so were we when they tossed us aside like garbage. Every action has consequences. If they hadn't left behind us, maybe today we'd all be one family, willing to help each other out. But they chose a different reality, and this is where it led. I'll update again after tomorrow's run-in with Martin. Judging from how he blew up at Caleb, I'm expecting blazeworks. And now, here it is, the final chapter of a story 13 years in the making. Honestly, I never thought so many of you would follow along this far. Thanks for all the messages and support. It's been wild seeing how many people actually get why Caleb and I did what we did. After Caleb's dinner disaster, it was finally my turn. I decided to walk straight into Martin's business that day, unannounced. No disguises this time, just me in my regular clothes. I didn't need to pretend anymore. When I walked through the door, the receptionist, who turned out to be their oldest daughter, looked at me like she'd just seen a ghost. I guess Caleb and I look enough alike that she knew right away who I was. She tried blocking me from getting to Martin's office, but I brushed past her without breaking stride. I didn't even need directions. I could hear Martin in there, barking into the phone about taking to court someone over the building. I pushed open the door right in the middle of his rant. The way his face dropped when he saw me was worth every damn minute of the last 13 years. He cut the call instantly and just stared. I grinned and asked if he remembered me. He called me the other parasite and told me to get out before he called security. I laughed out loud, because the only security was a dead camera system sitting in the corner. Classic Martin. All bluff, no bite. I strolled in, sat down across from him, and kicked my feet up on his desk like I owned the place. I told him I was there to talk about the property he'd just leased. His anger gave way to confusion, then his face turned ghostly pale when it hit him that I was Daniel. He shouted that I'd committed scam. Said I'd be caught. I reminded him I hadn't lied about a single thing regarding the property. Every document was correct, every fact true. It wasn't my fault he was too greedy and too cheap to pay for a proper inspection. Then, out of nowhere, he grabbed a heavy paper axe and hurled it at my head. I ducked and it shattered against the wall. His daughter ran in after hearing the crash, and Martin lost it, screaming for her to call the cops. I stayed calm, which only made him angrier. I pulled out my phone and hit play on Caleb's dinner recording, his own voice sneering at us as leeches, admitting to abandoning us, the sound of him flipping the dining table. While his words filled the room, I laid out papers I'd brought along, his lease agreement, every ugly clause highlighted in yellow. I explained that not only was he on the hook for nines of thousands in repairs, but he was locked into that 6-year term with no escape. Financially, he was finished. His daughter stood frozen, eyes bouncing between me and him. I turned to her and asked if she remembered the day they burned our stuff. She nodded. I asked if she remembered laughing. Tears rolled down her face as she whispered she was just a child following orders. Martin tried twisting the story, claiming they'd left us with his brother-in-law, that we were dangerous, that we'd threatened the younger kids. His own daughter snapped back at him, saying she'd found the emails where he and Mom spelled out their plan to dump us before moving to France. That floored me. I hadn't known those emails existed. Turns out, since Caleb's dinner visit, the kids had been digging into the truth on their own. Martin barked at her to shut up, accused her of betrayal. She blazed back that he was the one who betrayed family when he threw 2 children away like trash. Then she stormed out, slamming the door. With her gone, Martin shifted gears, suddenly begging, offering me cash to tear up the lease, saying we could work out a deal. I laughed in his face and told him we already had a deal 13 years ago, when he left behind us. The terms were simple, he'd regret it for the rest of his life. Then I stood up and walked out. His daughter was waiting by my car. She apologized for her role in that day, even though she'd just been a kid, and told me she and her siblings had been asking questions about us for years but were always told we'd run away. She handed me a flash drive filled with the emails, plus other documents. She said she was finished covering for her parents' lies. That night, Caleb and I pored over the files. The emails were brutal, line after line about how to get rid of us before the move, Martin calculating how much money they'd save without us, Mom suggesting we be left with her cousin Naomi, Martin replying that Naomi wouldn't take us because she knew what kind of problems we were. Then the final decision to abandon us and let the system take us. The flash drive also contained their son's recent medical records. He truly was very sick, and financial statements showing Martin's business had been sinking even before we started our payback. He was buried under bad investments and maxed out leverage. While we sat reading, Caleb's phone kept buzzing. Mom again and again, begging him to reconsider, saying her boy was getting worse, even offering money, though we had no clue what money she thought she had left. Caleb didn't answer. The following day, we went scorched earth. We sent the emails to everyone in Martin's business circle, signed with our own names, not hiding a thing. We attached the neighbor's video of them set alight our belongings, telling us to walk to foster care, and laid out the truth of what had been done to us. We also forwarded everything to the ex-9 family, cousins, uncles, aunts, people who'd believed for years that we were troubled kids who ran away. For the first time in 13 years, they were faced with the truth. The fallout was immediate. Martin's phone must have exploded, because not long after, he rang me on my real number. His daughter must have handed it over, raging that I'd ruined him. Business partners were pulling out. The bank was reconsidering his loans. Investors were demanding explanations he couldn't give. At the same time, relatives started reaching out to us after all these years, horrified by what they learned. Some needed the video before they believed. A handful accused us of twisting the story. But honestly, whether they believed or not didn't matter to us anymore. The truth was out in the open now. The very next day, Mom showed up at Caleb's apartment without warning. She was a wreck, red eyes, crying so hard she could barely get her words out. She said Martin had thrown her out after learning she'd been talking to us behind his back, that their son's condition was getting worse, doctors pushing treatment, and she dropped to her knees begging Caleb to help. Caleb looked her dead in the eye and asked where she'd been when he needed someone. When he was 13 and parentless, when he got bullied at school for living in a basement, when he was 14 and working after class just to help cover rent. She had nothing, no explanation, just more tears and begging. He told her he'd think about it and shut the door in her face. She stayed pounding on the door for nearly an hour before finally giving up and leaving. Word from the step-siblings was that Martin's business was collapsing fast. The property mess had only sped up the crash of a company that was already circling the drain. He'd even taken out a third mortgage on their house to cover that lease deposit, and now house loss was looming. 3 days after our email blast, Martin's sister called me furious, but not at us. She was furious at him. She swore she hadn't known the truth, claimed she would have taken us in if she had. I didn't buy it, but whatever. She also said Martin and Mom were splitting up. Martin was blaming Mom, saying none of this would have happened if she hadn't reached out to us. Then the next curveball came from someone I never expected, Uncle Victor. The same uncle who begrudgingly took us in all those years ago. He called me out of nowhere. We hadn't spoken in forever. He said he'd gotten our email, seen the proof, and admitted he'd known all along that we'd been left behind, not that we ran away. Martin had phoned him the day they left for France, cast aside us on him like we were baggage, told him we were his problem now. Victor had agreed, but never wanted us, which explained why he treated us the way he did. Didn't excuse it, but at least it added up. A week after everything detonated, Caleb made up his mind about the kidney. He got tested to see if he was a match. Turns out, he was. He told Mom he'd donate under 3 conditions. First, she had to sign a legal admission of leaving children behind. Second, she had to confess publicly on her social media, where she'd been parading herself as perfect mom 4 years. She said yes immediately. She would have said yes to anything by then. But here's the thing, we weren't heartless. That boy hadn't done a thing wrong. He was innocent in this, just like we once were. So Caleb went through with the procedure. Not for her, not for Martin, but for the kid. Recovery was brutal. I took time off work to take care of him. Mom tried to visit at the hospital, but Caleb refused to let her in. She'd signed the document, posted the confession, and now her spotless image was ruined. Her friends dropped her. The PTA she led asked her to resign. Years of pretending to be the model mother crumbled overnight. Martin never showed up. According to the step-siblings, he'd moved into a cheap apartment. His business was in financial collapse. The property deal had finished him off. Last we heard, he was trying to sue to void the lease, claiming I misrepresented myself, but the contract was airtight. He'd signed it willingly without inspection. Typical Martin, blaming everyone but himself. As for the step-siblings, the older two stay in touch every now and then. They're still trying to process the truth, balancing the parents they thought they knew against the reality of what was done to us. The youngest, the sick kid, is doing better since the operation. Caleb gets health updates from the doctors, but he doesn't speak to him directly. Mom sends texts sometimes, full of apologies and gratitude, but we almost never answer. 10 years of silence, then suddenly she had endless words when she needed us. Too little, too late. Some people might say we went too far, that we should have refused the kidney and just walked away. But they didn't hurt us just once. They cut us out completely, built a happy little world without us, acted like we'd never existed. Then, when life turned against them, they came running back expecting help. Maybe one day the anger will cool. Maybe one day we'll feel differently. But right now? I don't regret a single move we made. They threw 2 kids out like trash, laughed while set alight our belongings, told us to walk ourselves into foster care. They left us with nothing. Now they know how that feels. Through it all, Caleb and I are closer than ever. He's healing up, ready to get back to his medical studies next semester. I'm still working at the warehouse, but I'm planning on going back to school too, maybe for business. We've got each other's backs, and we always will. That's what real family means.
That was my story. What do you think about it? Would you have acted the same way or chosen differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to the Keeping Secrets channel for more stories like this. Oh, and one more thing. This story is our little secret, so shh.